roughly the same amount of churches in Washington State as are incarcerated people. And incarcerated people, while they're in these distant lockdown hells, scattered in far-flung corners of the state, they all eventually come back to our own communities. And so that was the aha for us, is that this is something churches can do. I've preached in so many churches years ago that would be like, well, people would say, what can we do? And for years the answer was, well, nothing, Donate, get on our newsletter, because help us go do this kind of Green Beret work, diving into the trenches, 3 hours away from your church. Whereas now it's like, with people coming home to communities, you guys are much more equipped to serve someone coming home to Port Angeles than we are. And this is something that churches can do. And you can't do it alone. That's what I really like seeing when the teams come together, is there's so many gifts that emerge. And all of us are used to thinking, well, I don't have what it takes. But in churches, I've seen so many, oftentimes retired folks that feel kind of useless. I mean, they're glad to be done with their job, but if they confess, like, I don't know if I'll be much help. But having that time is a huge gift, especially, I think we can all feel how busy life can be. That retired members of our team are able, oftentimes right off the jump, to be writing letters, to care, to write back and forth, and to care about someone. Oftentimes retired folks have raised kids, maybe even our grandparents, and that kind of instant love and attention to someone who's in prison, who oftentimes didn't get that from a parent growing up, is massive. And then someone who has employment connections, and someone who's very good clerically to put the team together and be researching. There's so much just bureaucratic online difficulty that people coming home don't know how to navigate. And so those kind of skills start to come together, and people feel like, I've never felt like the purpose of church until I was part of this team. Because like, as a microcosm, like we're a part of a body with different skills, and together we're doing something beautiful. So we've got a red light right now, so that means people might be at home watching right now. Welcome. We're just doing some questions and answers around specifically the program of One Parish, One Prisoner, and how it works, and specifically how it's going to be looking as First Presbyterian Port Angeles. You all begin with us.
Question?
Yeah, thanks, Ken.
Chris, would you repeat the questions for the folks at home? As they're asked?
Yeah.
And my question is, what is the biggest misconception that a fellow like me, born and bred in the church, has about prisoners or inmates? And what is their biggest misconception of folks like me?
Okay, that's a wonderful question, a long one for me to repeat. What is the most common misconception that folks maybe in churches or that have never had felony convictions, what's the biggest misconception they have about men and women who are in prison or in the system? And on the other side of that, what's the most common misconception, am I getting you right, of folks releasing from correctional facilities about the communities to which they return? I'm a verbal processor, so I'm going to realize something right now as I begin answering this question. I would start by saying the biggest misconception is that the other is scary. That oftentimes within minutes, oftentimes just a photo, like if we already had someone paired, we'd share the photo of the person. This is Derek. This is some of Derek's story. And we read a paragraph in misspelled, very fragile, humble handwritten application sharing some of their story. Fear, out the window. It's so easy. It's just like rolling away the stone and taking off the layers. It's just like, oh, Lazarus, you look like my nephew. You're not the dead boogeyman, right? That you're not the scary felon coming back into society. You're a fragile dude or gal just like me. And that oftentimes heartbreak rushes in. You're like, oh, and if you're someone like me, that must have been terrifying to be in prison for years. That must be terrifying to be released with only $40 and without an ID and not sure if the community hates you or fears you and if anyone will even accept you again. Sometimes if you even stepped into a new church, you feel that. And you're like, are people going to like me? Are they going to accept me? That's just showing up at a church. Imagine showing up to a whole town and you're afraid people, if they get to know you, they will run. So the biggest misconception is that there's anything to fear. Through our application process, we vet out folks that would be like clearly manipulating, and I've been manipulated a lot in my day. It's the minority of the men and women I've worked with over the years, but I'm a sucker and I'm really trusting. And so the few folks who are looking to do a manipulation game, they found me, and I've gotten better. I don't know if I get great. I've gotten better at seeing what that game looks like a mile away. And we detect those, and we see like, okay, I think someone's trying to game this application for One Parish One Prisoner. And one of the biggest things that we vet that out is we don't say all the material support that we're going to invite teams to do. We don't advertise that with our outreach in the facilities. That we just say, if you're looking for no resources but relationships, if you're willing for the next year and a half to be building relationships with visits, because letters take time, even prison can be busy too. If you're looking for a team of relationships, of building new connections in the community, invite people to really know you and to really know them, and they can walk you through the different resources in your community. So oftentimes that helps us vet out as well, people that are just wanting to say what they'd want to get something. We're like, we're not offering anything other than relationship. But then we surprise them later with, there's gonna be a lot of support. The team is gonna fundraise to help with the first 3 months of rent and to pay stuff from like for clothing, hygiene, paying off some debt so they can get their driver's license. Someone in this church probably has a used car sitting around somewhere, or one they wouldn't mind donating. Yeah, rather than putting together $5,000, someone has a used car sitting around. Be like, oh yeah, you can use this. It's not a gem, but it's enough to get you a job for the first 3 or 4 months. Stuff like that. So what's a misconception of folks in prison coming home is that their common misconception is that everyone in churches, they've got their life put together. Man, I don't know if I can tell them about like how fucked up I am. Sorry, you're gonna hear the F word more than me if you're engaged with someone home from prison. So there's your vaccination. They have this understandable fear. They believe the masks. Well, maybe that's a good way, is that we believe the masks, the scary mask. You know, you see Alex in the video with the tattoos on his face. We believe the mask, that they're scary. They're not scary at all. They had to act scary because they've been hurt since they were little. So that's how they protected themselves. And then people in prison, they believe our masks, that we're just so happy, that we're just like that family photo in the Sears photo, framed in our hallways or on our website, not seeing, like, oh, whoa, they have, like I was sharing in the sermon, that they have mental health issues, that like their son's an alcoholic, and that they're estranged from their son, they haven't spoken for 20 years. Or that, man, that last pastor, everyone hated that pastor, and there's some drama in that church. They're like, man, I can relate to that. And so I think those are the misconceptions. Yeah.
I worked with Clallam County Drug Court for 20-something years.
Thank you.
And one of the major struggles that we had was bringing the people, after they did 6 months in treatment or a prison sentence, bringing them back to the community, especially in small communities where they immediately have no friends because their old friends were what helped them go to prison or treatment. How have you combated that?
Which part?
Well, how do the match, how do they work with the ex-prisoner to help them not get back into those old patterns? That was one of our hardest jobs.
Yep. So our question is from a parishioner here who worked with Clallam County Drug Court for years and had seen how hard it was when people came back to build new social networks and not go back to their old networks, to not go back to their old ways. It's a great question. I found that, going back to the Lazarus story, if folks didn't see the sermon, same sermon is going to be happening at the next service, we use the Lazarus story about there's 3 parts to it, of Jesus speaking new life into Lazarus, and then calling the community to roll away the structural barriers. And then third, inviting community to get even closer and touch and remove some of the protective layers. And for me, to now more talk shop, I've had to see that for myself as a minister, that one, God has to be doing something in this person's life. This isn't just a plug and play social work model. That I oftentimes forgot that, and I would just try to apply all my services, not realizing that, like, this, Chris, this would be, if you listen to your own sermon, this would be like you diving into the tombs and just dragging dead people out. And feeling good about rolling away stones and pulling off layers, but there's not new life happening. And so we're trying to listen to and trust in our organization that there has to be some kind of a change or hope happening in someone. They can't just be like, now you come home and we're going to pair you with somebody. You got to do good. That there has to be some new life happening, and then we can facilitate that. So that's first. Secondly, oftentimes why people go back to old areas, is that no one's rolling away the stone, so they're still stuck in the underground of the community. But if they knew, whoa, I could actually get good housing, I don't have to hit up my old homie's house, I don't have to, it's 2 months to my release, I don't have to talk to that toxic old boyfriend or girlfriend and make them think that I love them just so I can get a release address because I don't want to be homeless. And so oftentimes they get back into kind of drug-soaked relationships just to get housing, to get basic needs, to have someone give me some food. Because what they really want is, what, if I had a place where I could live and where there's good housing and where there's some support and I can get some shoes and clothes and people aren't going to judge me. There's other people who will do that. Hell yeah, I'd love to not have to go back to these old folks. That's oftentimes what we see, if that helps. And then oftentimes those relationships, once the person's out, they can help them navigate through access to even better resources. Now the hope is, and this is part of our hope, and part of it is as I'm writing these, there's 24 monthly learning modules as teams go along, and writing their first letters, to talking about mental health, to putting together housing plans. And we're trying to create a sense of trust and kinship along the way. So it's not just, well, I'm the person who's releasing and we're going to help you with the release, but when there's trust, hopefully when that person is up against hard times, dealing with PTSD and massive anxiety, they're not going back to drugs to numb the pain, but hopefully they're starting to deal with that pain through their letter writing and program, or at least they've built healthy enough relationships that when things are hitting the fan, they're calling up to be like, Martha, Kate, check it out. Like I'm about to lose my mind right now, and be like, hey, it's okay. We'll call up someone else on the team. Let's go have coffee. We got you. That oftentimes people go back to their old ways as a way of surviving stress, pain, and trauma, not just because they love being a criminal. But if we have outlets of support, maybe they don't need to go back to them. That's our hope.
So are you evaluating the prisoners prior to, like, do you do any, does a prisoner simply say, I want to be part of the program, that's it?
Yep.
Or is there evaluation?
So the question is about our in-reach process, or how we get our applications as we're trying to scale now. At first it was just guys that I knew from my 15 years working with folks in prison, and I could just let many of the folks I knew and they would get their applications. But now we're working with 7 in-reach partners. In-reach meaning reaching into facilities. And so an extensive team of Catholic chaplains, and there's a gang healing and recovery group that we started inside Monroe. There is a reentry group inside Clallam Bay. There is, you ever heard of the Prison Congregations of America? It's pretty cool. There's both Presbyterians and Lutherans have started this program where like they even commission a pastor to go and have like a small church, but inside that prison is just like a local neighborhood that deserves a parish. And so many incarcerated men and women inside the facility are like the deacons and the worship leaders, and it's like church. It's not just chaplaincy. They're honored as their own church. And what's great, they're great partners with us because oftentimes the men and women in those large prison congregations have all these church volunteers come in and they love it. And they're like, well, are there going to be people like this with me on the out? And they have been scrambling, be like, we don't know how to create this on the outside. And then we met and they were like, great, we can have all of our folks inside this group apply for One Parish One Prisoner. And then we share Rolodexes and we start recruiting churches in their networks based on the geography of the releasing person. So we have a variety of in-reach groups, and so that's our first step, is that the people that are already participating in some of these programs are already the kind of people we trust. I mean, all of us are kind of shady. Even in churches, we're all shady. I think that's part of the confession of being sinners. But at least the people who are participating in these programs are showing an earnest of wanting to be part of something, or wanting to grow, wanting to heal. And then when they get an application, the application has like 4 or 5 open answer questions about why do you want to build a relationship with the team? Why do you want to do this? What gifts inside you do you see yourself bringing to the community? How comfortable do you feel talking about your life and your story, and even at some point your crime, with your team? And we can get a feel pretty quickly if this person is ready to do the work, to open up. And that's what's most important to us. I'd rather take someone that has a triple homicide, who's doing the work and opening up their story and wanting to heal, versus someone that just has a litany of smaller charges and they're putting like one-word answers on their question. They're just looking to hustle people for a resource. So our vetting is not so much severity of crime, but openness of heart. We'd like to think that's aligned with what Jesus was looking for too. Other questions?
I assume you have women in the program as well.
We didn't for a long time until one of these prison congregations of America. We met just about 8 months ago inside Purdy. I mean, women's in Washington State's about 8%, and so it's a small subset. And inside that one prison, there's a really great group. This prison congregation is not super churchy. They're really rad and really well organized. And they started like grilling us and interviewing us about our governance structure and diversity in our board of directors. We're like, you guys are great. And so we are now getting like stacks of application from these women. We're excited to be serving a lot more women, not just men. Be cool if it was the first one paired would be here in Port Angeles. I'll let Alvin know. Alvin is our pairing coordinator. Other questions? Oh, and if there's anyone online, I don't know if you're like typing into the chat or if someone can shout out those questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
Mental health. It's difficult. I work with a homeless population myself, and it's difficult to deal with mental health.
Mm-hmm. Sure is.
It's much easier to deal with somebody who's committed a crime, who's been incarcerated, or even done drugs. They've been incarcerated, so now they're dry from drugs. But mental health is a continuing problem. I'm not sure our church has the education how to deal with a person that's going through a mental health crisis.
Right. Well, first off, the church is not responsible for folks, because that can get overwhelming. The church is there to support and befriend and navigate someone who's coming home to the community anyway. So first off, like I think we want to get better in our trainings to talk about the degrees of responsibility, because some folks can really go into a lot of anxiety thinking like, well, we are responsible to deliver success and health. And so first off, the success is the responsibility for success is not fully on this team of the parish team navigating with them. Secondly, we have it both in a module on mental health where to open up the conversation, that's a lot of it. It's hard to even get to the setting up appointments and evaluations until we can just talk about it. And there's a lot of shame in churches, just like there is in prison. People want to be like, oh yeah, I mean, on my file they put me on these meds, but like I'm cool. And they're not. And they do need some extensive mental health support. And so we're hoping that both early on there's just conversation and trust to talk about that as well. And then secondly, we have 4 roles that happens during the Rolling Away the Stones module early on. And one of them is navigating health systems. And so we have like a kind of like a play-by-play, even if someone has 0 competence or 0 experience, the navigating health systems person, we're just walking them through like Reentry for Dummies of getting their insurance set up through Apple Health, normally at the DSHS office, and getting them set up at their, oftentimes parole has them do a mandatory chemical or chemical dependence or substance abuse evaluation, and then help them get to those appointments, and as well as a mental health evaluation. And those really do help. It's just going to the mandated evaluation really helps to kind of open up that conversation, as well as, hey, are you taking any meds in there? Is the prison staff prescribing you anything? Let's make sure we write that down. And when you get out, let's make sure that you get some continuum of care. That's where we've seen a few mental health cases really stumble, is where mental health is not great in prisons, but it's something. It's oftentimes more than they received on the outs. But then when they get out, they run out of their 30 days of meds that they were released with, and then month 2 they really start going kind of haywire and disappearing. We found out, they weren't just relapsing, they ran out of their meds and they're going off cold turkey. So we want to create some continuum of care with that member of the team. That's the beginning of how we want to address it, but I'd love to hear more from you based on what I just shared, how we can improve that.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I mean, it's a learning process, so.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm thinking of a couple of mental health people that I've dealt with my program, and it's difficult.
It is.
Because oftentimes when they start feeling good because they're on their meds,
Yep.
then they don't think they need their meds, and then they don't take them.
Yep.
And then they spiral into trouble. So
Yep.
I find it's much easier to take care of a drug addict than a person with mental health issues.
And especially someone with mental health that's not in touch with their need.
Yeah.
for mental health support.
Right.
Absolutely, it is hard. Oh, and a third thing I think goes back to the what we just are calling internally just vetting these applications is my coworker Alvin has done a much better job than I did when I was more stretched thin of calling into their DOC counselor on the inside. They're not really counselors, they're just kind of case managers. But calling in and just getting more of the story and seeing do you think this person would be a good fit for this program? So they're just kind of listening for like major missing pieces of the puzzle, like, hey, this person has extreme mental health needs. We're hoping to support them. If a church wants to do this, please know they're going to need a lot of mental support needs that maybe they didn't put on their application. So we're trying to listen through some of the case management support on the inside. Yeah?
Well, I can't sit silent on this one.
Yeah.
Your new worship leader was thrilled to find out that this program is happening in this church. I had a break in 2018, and it makes me extremely sensitive. And I'm not going to sit here and wear a mask in a church. You guys don't know me. Now you know a lot more than I'd like to tell you. But I love the idea of taking the bandages off.
Cool.
And I'm going to say bullshit out loud. There's a lot of bullshit going on in a church community, just like there is in any other community.
Oh, totally.
You want to get to know me, there's going to be stuff. And I get to know you, you're going to have stuff.
Are you going to be on the team?
I wish I could be.
Well, they might create an extra seat for that because that's very helpful energy right there. Remind me your name?
Michael.
Michael is just sharing for those who are at home Michael is leading the way by sharing some of his own story right now. That in 2018, he said, had his own breakdown with mental health, and that's something that he is affirming in. But the sermon and what the work that we're trying to do, that a lot of folks in churches do hide behind kind of nice church smile masks, and we've got all sorts of pain and anxieties and family nightmares going on, and we're not sure if church is the place to talk about it. And so if this is a venue that can open that conversation as you've led us, God bless you. I think we need a lot more of that. I don't know if that, keep going if I cut you off there. Thank you for sharing that. And that's our worship leader, so I trust this church even more.
Hey, Chris.
Yeah.
I know you share some pretty powerful stories, both on the video and in person and stuff. Any big discoveries for you, aha moments in Underground Ministries or OPOP that kind of you want to share? I mean, for you personally, what you've experienced.
Well, what comes to mind right now might not be what you're asking for. Last time I was here, you might have remembered I was here with my colleague, who is formerly incarcerated. Remember that piece where I talked about how I'm a sucker? So this is a really painful aha, and led to my pretty close to mental health breakdown and running away from this. Is the person that I had invited in my home, who I'd written letters with for 7 years weekly. I'd built this organization with, had been gaming me, long game. Brilliant manipulator, wonderful, charismatic storyteller, very good at helping guys, but really I found out that every time I'd leave the room, he had a whole different agenda with every guy that we served. And most guys either left, they said, okay, that's not what we're about. I trusted Chris, he said this guy was cool, but it was exciting, and I learned that how much I like success, and how in churches we can too quickly overlook problems going on because something looks good. And working with my former colleague looked so good. It looked so cool. And we were getting a lot of attention. And it made me blind to some manipulation going on. And I probably contributed to it by, rather than saying, hey, we need to look at this early on, he probably felt me being like, nope, just like the positive storyteller that can move the mission forward is what Chris wants. And so I think I even played into that. And so we're learning how, as I have been learning about codependency, and I can spot codependent members of teams more quickly now, how much they are doing too much too soon, and they feel overly responsible for their people, and oftentimes these codependent folks, and we come from oftentimes. See, you crack this open, Matt, and I don't know how to say this in a neat kind of peel off the cup way, but. Many folks who are in churches that are codependent like me, it comes from parts of our story where we needed to be taking care of someone in the family system in order to feel stability or love. And so that oftentimes sets us up to be the most manipulated by people who are good at manipulating, because they know this person will do everything for me if I just tell them the right story once a week. And so we're learning how to put even a module in there around boundaries and codependency and being aware of our needs, and that it's okay to call bullshit on someone, because there's a lot of bullshit coming out of prisons too, but how we can do that with open eyes and with grace and with gentleness, instead of kind of like walking on eggs or kind of like avoiding the conversation. So we haven't nailed that yet, but that's been the aha for me, is like, as this blew up in my life and in my face while I'm trying to help other folks in churches walk with people at first, like, how I need to shut this whole thing down. If this is happening to me, that kind of like, what a humiliating, disproving of this whole enterprise. But so many churches came back. So many folks, men and women, came out of prison. They said, Chris, not everyone of us in prison is like your dude. He's a real mastermind, but we still need help. We still need this. And a lot of churches said, hey, we don't hold that against you. We still want to help someone. So that was my faith of like everything dying and like the vision being kind of resurrected. And it wasn't, I don't know, that's a longer story, but thanks, man. Yeah.
So what I'm hearing both in my own heart and in the room is a sense of concern, and maybe distill it down to fear is like, so how do we do this? And I'm just curious,
Yeah.
How do you, Chris, help the congregation? Say somebody runs into mental health issues
Yep.
or drug issues and feels completely overwhelmed. Where is the support from the program to help the church get through that?
Well, there's some support from the program, but a lot of folks are meaning for them personnel in our tiny organization. We can help folks email or call, like, hey, we're really feeling stuck. This is scary. Walk us through this. Sure, we're here. We're not a huge organization yet, where we need to give you an 800 number. But a lot of it is that we invite teams just to go back to what we've invited them to do, which is to keep meeting as a team, be praying as a team. And a part of our prayer that we introduce is something called the welcoming prayer, which comes from the contemplative prayer tradition of oftentimes it's us learning how to let go of our anxiety for results and approval, which is oftentimes what we're really dealing with. Part of it is concern for the individual, but part of it is anxiety of just like, I'm losing control, the program's going off the rails, and we let go of approval. That if this fails, we will have failed. That we're realizing that's the subtext, that's the script that so many teams are dealing with, is just wanting to do this right. And so helping teams come back together, you're not alone, you're part of a group, you're not responsible for this person, but you're loving them. How can you let this break your heart? And that's oftentimes something that we try to address early on, is that so much of our panic is just like, I'm afraid this just might make me sad, and I refuse to feel sad or have my heart broken, as opposed to we invite people early on to be like, this person might not make it. The pressure's not on you to deliver success. We want to orient you to faithfulness. And so maybe faithfulness at this point, if this person's just spiraling and you can't stop it, you do not need to be the savior. And that's a pressure that's put on us, or that comes with the weirdness of white supremacy's feeling we need to be white saviors too. We don't need to be the saviors. We can walk faithfully. And if this person's resurrection is stillborn, it's like a miscarried birth. There's just a time when you weep. There's just a time when you wait and you weep and you let it break your heart. And I'm trying to tuck enough spiritual formation into these modules where teams can sit together, like the disciples after the crucifixion, where they're going, what the hell just happened? Right? Like we had a plan. We were going to come into Jerusalem. We were going to take the Sanhedrin. Reform was going to come. Then the Romans were going to be, our dude just got axed. And they're panicking. And that where Jesus comes and meets them when they're in a dark room with the doors locked and they're scared is where we try to see that moment of how can Jesus visit us in the collapse of all of our plans. And that's the moment of resurrection for the disciples. That most of the disciples didn't see it happen, Jesus resurrecting the tombs. Their resurrection is Jesus coming through their despair and disappointment. And so we want to help people grieve. I don't know if that helps. So there's as many best practices as we can, but no best practice can save you from heartbreak.
Well, as I see
sorry, one more pause. We had a question here, and then go ahead.
Realizing that the program really calls for a great deal of vulnerability on the congregation's part and members' part, I'm wondering how churches can possibly respond to you, having some idea of how churches operate from beyond here. Do you find that churches want to be that vulnerable with others?
Great.
What's kind of...
Great question.
My answer no right now.
One of the questions was, I'm getting that this program requires a great amount of vulnerability on the part of congregations. Have you found that there's churches that don't want to be vulnerable? Yeah, there's a great deal of trouble. Do churches want to be vulnerable? No. But I feel like it's just like working with people in recovery, people coming home from prison. Do they want to totally trust everyone? No, but there's a part of them that does. And so we want to create an avenue and a support for that one part of them that does want to be clean, that does want to make a new life. And I think that when churches, we wouldn't be having this conversation if there weren't a desire in this church to move in this direction, right? There's a lot of churches that go, no, we've got lots of programs, thanks so much. Relationship with prisoners, no thanks. Or they're like, yeah, we want to help prisoners, and then they read our materials and they're just like, oh, mutual relationship. No, we just want to save their souls, and we're not for them. And so oftentimes the churches that partner with us, that have us preach, that we're having this conversation, are the churches that they're wanting this. Even though there's part of us that's scared to death of being vulnerable, I think there's a part of us that's dying to see the glory of God, that wants to experience what we're singing about song after song on Sunday, about this amazing grace. But you can't get to grace unless you let people see your shit. Sorry, it's the second time I've cussed. I'll try to keep it under 3. You had a question.
So, I think I have more comment, and that is, every question I've heard can be answered with the fact that Jesus called us into community. And we're called into community because we all bring our own set of gifts and abilities. Mm-hmm. And it's by the power of the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
And it's by that same power that we're able to take on new ministries and do what He's called us to do. Mm-hmm. And so, questions about mental health, questions about, medical, and all these other things. We're a community. We all have our resources. We all have our things that we bring to the table.
Yes.
And that's the power that makes something like this work.
Right. I don't know what nugget of the question I should distill for our audience at home. But I'm just going to let my answer or my response try to absorb it, is at the end of the day, expertise or no, like the body of Christ, the community is a great place to start. And so that's our vision that got us into this with One Parish One Prisoner, is when we heard roughly the same amount of folks in prison in Washington State. And right now it's going down. It's like between 15 and 16,000. It's roughly around the same number as churches out there. And so when I first jumped at that, and I heard it at Episcopalian Church 5 years ago, that was not our mission. We were just talking about our work working with gang-affected prisoners in Western Washington. It struck me as that's a scalable model. That even if every church sucks at it, right? Wouldn't that be great if every person in a Washington prison was in relationship with 5 or 6 moderately healthy people that wanted to be real with them and support them coming home? Wouldn't that be great? And so that premise is still what we come back to. And slowly we've gotten better and better, but I'm learning now not to go after expertise too much. Like, we're wanting to put as many good practices and to equip our teams for solid, healthy, good journeys. But I think, at the end of the day, expertise is never why I went to the church. And I think expertise is not why Jesus chose the 12 disciples. And so that gives me hope, is that the movement of the book of Acts is just this incredibly divinely kind, resilient spirit putting together relationships of knuckleheads that don't want to have anything to do with each other, and magic happens. Something happens that alters the fabric of society. And then the experts can make it better later. But connecting these relationships is, I think, the movement of the New Testament that excites me. Does that kind of connect with what you're saying?
I've always felt that as human beings,
Yeah.
we want to do things ourselves.
Right.
And we fail.
We do.
And what does that tell me? Well, that tells me it takes a community
Yep.
to make anything work.
It does.
And
And
part of that community is God himself.
yes.
He has to be in the center.
Yep. And that's the Lazarus story, is that God is the one drawing life into this person. And it takes a community to roll away stone. I don't know what that stone looked like in Lazarus' time, but I'm sure I don't lift weights. Like, I probably couldn't have rolled it away on my own. But that the team is key. And so that would also be a connection I've learned, Matt, over the years, of that when I was working with a lot of guys, I was alone. I belonged to an organization, but it was very much everyone go do your own thing. There was no sense of teamwork. So now that I see how great some of these One Parish One Prisoner teams are we're working with, I'm like, man, I wish I had an OPOP team during my years, that I had like 4 or 5 people all working with me and loving one individual. So the team is where the fellowship shares. And it's been encouraging to me to have folks in our teams report back to us, and like our initial surveys and conversations we're doing, about how much this is what they've always wanted to get from a small group. But it wasn't until they were working with someone coming home from prison that they learned to really rely on people and got to know people in their church and risked being known. And so that's what our hope is as well, is not just a team becomes effective for welcoming someone home from prison, but is an occasion for us to experience the body of Christ in ways we've...
Strength to each individual in that group, too.
Yeah.
Where when they're facing a challenge, they can bring it into the group as well. And it strengthens the whole group when they do that.
Absolutely. Like there was a team that just met a month ago in someone's backyard, and I was there. And we don't recommend that people coming home find housing with someone in the church. At first we did that, not because we're scared of someone coming home hurting them, but rather it puts too much of a power dynamic in the relationship. Whereas their basic need for shelter is based on, well, this person could kick me out. There's a lot of just like, it becomes really surface. It becomes like a landlord relationship, which undoes everything we're trying to do. So we oftentimes say, help them, find transitional housing, paying the down payment. But this person, about 4 or 5 months in, had a transitional house, moved in with his girlfriend, and they were fighting, and old DV issues were coming up. And one guy on the team said, luckily this person was seasoned in working with people in recovery. He said, just get over here, stay at my wife and mine's spare room in our house. And they came over, and he did great. It really helped him de-escalate a domestic violence situation, focus on himself, get his priorities together. And we were meeting in the backyard, and this team member, who's normally really quiet, we thought we'd be talking about the guy and his needs and how we can help him, and he just started weeping. And he said, he's like, I didn't want to tell you this, bro, to the guy out of prison. He's like, I don't want to make you feel awkward in my home. You're so welcome, but I need you to know the last 2 weeks I've gotten so much crap from my family saying, what are you doing inviting this person in? And he's like, this has been my ache my whole life, is I've just been trying to do what my parents wanted me to do, to follow Jesus growing up. Whenever I reach out and try to love people, they tell me I'm dumb, they tell me I'm being careless, they tell me I'm reckless, and it gives me so much joy to have you in my house, bro. And I'm sorry to take over the meeting, but I'm just getting in touch with how much this hurts with my family. And so many people in our church group could relate to that. And we were able to care for this guy in the church, and the guy home from prison was able to be like, man, I can relate. My family's really fucked up too. And they loved on this person in the church, and hopefully that story encouraged and shed some light on this guy. That was a kind of pain that would be really hard to name, about being undermined by his own family and being not sure if he's supported in his faith or not.
Well, give the former inmate, the prisoner that was in that community, an opportunity to take on a different role.
Yep. Yeah, that's why we put on our application as well, is what strengths do you see bringing in? There's another team in Bellingham where there was a member on the team that she was writing her prison letter. She's like, I'm sorry I can't be very present helping you. My husband's dying of cancer right now. And the guy on the inside was the best listener, and they'd get on calls, and he was being pastoral support to her for 8 months. And she was so... That makes it louder. She was so ashamed to cover her face that I know I was supposed to help them, and he was helping me, but I was like, no, this is how that's the mutuality we're talking about.
That's a sure sign that the ministry that you've been issuing out is working.
Great. You and I could talk for a long time. I'm going to make sure there's room for any other questions before we run out of time. Kate?
One of the things I really liked about this kind of stuff was like it's more of a collaboration rather than like a savior relationship. Because I think all of us are lonely, all of us are messy, and so it's like what you were saying where we help each other. So my question is, how do you kind of keep that saviorism and especially like that white saviorism in check with that relationship? Because I feel like sometimes all of us put on the facade that, you know, we're helping this person rather than this person helping us, or like building that relationship. And how do you keep that check for yourself? Because I'm always like trying to keep that check for myself as well. I'm an EMT, and so I see like every day, you know, where that field is definitely, the ego is huge and the saviorism is huge. And so I'm just curious your thoughts on keeping that savior.
How do we keep in check? The question is the white saviorism, the impulse to be the mentor, the savior, the answer haver, the situation fixer, instead of being in that place of collaboration. And that, I love how you said it, we're all lonely, we're all a mess. You had a third line that was really nice. We're all lonely, we're all a mess, we're supporting and collaborating one another into, your problem is a little big, now we're coming in as the rescue team. What we're trying to do is do a better job of even this today, like even at the gate, like inviting people into this program, reframing this. Because I found that oftentimes people don't want to be the savior, they've just felt that they had to be their whole life. And that we found that our program is actually giving them permission. We've had few people say, hey, you know what, no, I really want to be the savior. I haven't got that pushback yet. Whenever we say, hey, you know what, you don't have to be. You can just be messed up. There's just a collective relief. And so I think we're kind of, that maybe that's part of the unbinding of churches and the unbinding of privileged white folks, is to be like, you don't, the pressure's off. You don't have to be. And I think the way we try to keep it in check is just reminding people that we can relapse on saviorism. And we're trying to bake that into some of the modules. It's in the kickoff orientation. And that we really try to stress stories. And it's always also what stories you tell, right? So we don't tell throughout the module stories of how that person just totally figured it all out with the driver's license and pulled that person out of a drug house. We don't tell those stories. We tell stories of that fragile mutuality.
We have time for one.
Time for one more.
Which will be my question.
Take it.
Yeah. So we have a limited number of people, space on the OPOP, which we've kind of filled and everything. But for everybody else, that's heard this and
Great.
Kind of moved. I was going to ask you a question: how did the church get here? But that's a whole nother, whole nother time. But what can individuals do to, either to support Underground Ministries
Great.
or to make a personal change? Because I think that's where it starts with little steps like that. So what are things that people can do, and then maybe share how people can support Underground Ministries?
Great. Tee it up.
Yeah.
The question is, when a church does One Parish One Prisoner, ultimately that's a team of 5 to 7 members, which includes the pastor. But what can everyone else do, other than kind of like hearing the pitch and the stories at the beginning? It's a great question. And normally we don't get enough airtime to answer that. What the team is wanting to do is hard. And more that everyone else understands what's going on, everyone else in the congregation can support that team. Just like, how are you? How's it going? What's going on? Is there anything we can do to help? And that team knowing that they're not being needy to say, hey, this is an intense season, we need someone else to help out with some rides or whatever else. Maybe there's a lot of people here today, they're like, you know what, I can't commit to being part of the team that meets every month for 24 months for a monthly meeting and letter writing, but I do have some time and some energy on a occasional basis. Let the team know. Say, I'm interested. Call on me. Here's some of my skills. Secondly, we really want to help teams not feel kind of overwhelmed in the margins, but to be regularly sharing from up front. So that this is the last time you have to hear me jabber, that you'll be hearing from your team members up here, sharing the name and the photo of the person and what they're learning. And so you can be supported. Like if we haven't heard in a while, say, hey, Matt, because that's part of the pastor on the team, their role is to help with communications and sermons and liturgy so that people are hearing the story regularly as part of the testimony. And then thirdly, they're going to, about a year in, do a welcome home prep event where they're going to tell more stories and they're going to say, here's what we're up against. We actually know the fines we're facing. We know what transitional house we're probably working with, and we need to raise about $2,000 as a one-time amount. And show up for that. Help it. Start saving now, because they're going to need it. And I guess fourth is, if you can be a part of the team, awesome. If you would like to see this movement happen beyond this one church, the personnel and the modules and the speaking it takes for us to try to multiply this and the pairing, we need more personnel, like yesterday at Underground Ministries. And if you would like to support this movement happening, the only way we grow, I mean, we get grants here and there, but then they take a lot of reporting and they disappear after 12 months, is ongoing recurring donations from a growing amount of people. That helps us build a movement, that helps us build a budget. If this is the kind of church you want to see happening and you want to work it into your tithe, we would love for you to find that little piece of paper over there and say, yeah, and we'll email you. It's easy to set up recurring donations online, and then hopefully we'll have the whole presbytery signed up within 2 years. That's my first goal.
Thank you, Chris.
Cool. Thank you. I'm excited for you guys. This is more prep than we've had with any church, so it'll be great. Thank you.